Hi everyone, this is Sharan. Welcome to my channel. This is the day 2 of our tutorial video series on learning data science in 100 days. Today we are going to see creation of variable using Python, as well as we are going to see about the data type string. What can be done using Python, the various operations. Let's get started. Let's see how to create a variable in Python using Jupyter Notebook. Also, we are going to see some of the operations that can be done using Python. We are going to see how to check the data type and how to change the data type, which is something like casting a string into an integer or the other way around, and how they are indexed. And we are going to see the string length, the strip function, split, concat, as well as replace functions. Okay, so let's get started. So first, defining the variable is as simple as we give the name of the variable. So here in this case, we create a variable called input1, and then we pass the value as 10. So here, as you see, we have created 3 variables. So for the input 1, we have passed 10 as the value. The second one, we have passed 23.5 as the value, and for the third one, we have passed a text, which is learn data science in 100 days. So now let's see what's the data type for each of the 3 inputs. So in order to find the data type, we use something called as type. So as we have covered already, so first we execute this particular cell so that these variables are created and the values are defined. After that, we execute the second cell in order to check the data type for input 1. So by executing this, what happens is it says that it is integer. So the value is 10 and then it's integer. So for the second one, which is 23.5, let's see what the data type is. So now, so since this is a decimal, so the data type here is float. Now let's also check for the input 3. So as you see, so since we have given a text here, so the data type of this variable is considered as a string. So now we have seen creation of variables and passing values to them. So depending upon the value of that particular variable, the data type would be considered accordingly. So now let's see how to change a string into an integer. So here, the input 4, what I am doing is I'm passing the value 12.25, but the only difference between here, the input 1 and input 2, as well as the input 4, is I'm going to pass this value within the double quotes. So when you pass and value within the double quotes, then what happens is this particular value will be considered as a string. So let's see what's happening here. So now I'm going to execute this. So as you see, so even though the value is 12.25, the type is considered as string because it is given within the double quotes. So now what we are going to do is we are going to cast the value here, which is string, into float. So how we can do it? We can do it by making it as float of the value of the variable. So here this would convert the input 4 from string into float. So let's maybe print this and see what's happening. Okay, so as you see here, so now what happens is now the data type of input 4 is converted into a float. So it's converted from string to a float. So this is kind of a casting operator. So if we use int here, so let's say I use int here, it's not able to convert because we have a decimal point here. So what happens is, so this string is attempted to, the query is attempting to convert this particular string into an integer, but because this value within the double quotes has a decimal point, it's unable to convert. So we can see the error here. So what we can do is now it means that this value is not definitely an integer. So we use float here, and now if you see, there won't be any error. So it's converted into an float. So that any string can't be converted into an float or integer. So it depends upon the value. So when we use float, it checks whether the value within the double quotes is a float. So if it is a float, so then this command will be successful. So otherwise it will throw as an error. So that's about changing the data type. So now maybe what we can do is we can pass the value instead of 12.25, we can pass 12, and we can try to convert it into an integer. So now if you see here, there is no error, because since we have only 12, which is an integer, when we use casting int of the variable, it is able to convert the input 4 into an integer. So that's how we change the data types. So now let's try to see into the string data type and then see what's happening, like how it is being treated in Python. So now what we do is we take the input 3. So in Python, what happens is when you pass an string to a variable, so here input 3, so this string here will be considered as an array of characters. So what happens here is, now what I'm doing is I'm going to just print input 3. So if I print input 3, you can see the whole value is getting printed. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to print the input 3, but I'm going to pass on the elements, so from 0 to 6. So now let's see what's happening. So when I execute this, so what happens is it prints learn. So in Python, so even though this is a string, it is being considered as an array of characters, and the index will always start with 0. So here when I say 0 to 6, what happens is 0 is the first element, so it's printing the first element. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, so including the space. So this space here is the 6th element. So by passing 0 colon 6, what we are doing is we are asking it to print from 0 up to the element, or up to the element in the array just before 6. So what happens is it prints up to here. So now let's say I want to print here, so which is 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. So now let's say I want to print learn data. So let me just pass 12. So let's see what's happened. So if you see here, it is printing up to S. So starting from 0, so if we start numbering them, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 until the space, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So the position of the character S is 11. So what's happening is as we pass 0 to 12, it's printing up to 11. So in order for me to just print learn data, so if I pass 10, so then what happens is I will be able to print just learn data. So what about the negative indexing? So what happens when I pass the negative value instead of positive value? So here let's try. So what I'm doing is for the same input 3, I have passed the value -3 to -1. So now let me execute this and then see what happens. So it prints A and Y, which is nothing but these two. So in Python, so in an array, when we pass on the negative value, so when we do -1, it means that the last element, so from the last element, when we give a negative value, so -1 would be the last element, and Y here would be -2, and A would be -3. So by saying -3 to -1, so what happens is it prints from A just before the last value, which is A and Y. So let's say I'm going to pass let's say 10. So then you will see the values are getting printed from N. So when we give the negative value, So it will start from the last one. So the last element of this character array would be S. So this would be -1 and Y would be -2 and so on. So that's how it prints. So now let's say we pass only one value, let's say -10. So if we don't pass any value, then let's see what happens. So here if you see, when we don't pass any value, starting from the element number like -10, which is starting from n, since there is no second element value, what happens is it prints all the element till the end. So we can try it here as well. So let's say we want 0 and we don't specify any end value. So then what happens is it will print the complete string. So now let's say I pass on the value as 5. So then it starts from the 5th element and prints until considers until the last element of this array. So here, even though it is a string, it is being considered as an array of characters. So that's how the string is being treated in Python. So the next one is, so we have covered until this, so how the string is being covered as an array. And we also seen how the indexing works in Python. Like the indexing always starts with 0. And when we use the negative indexing, it's kind of like references from the last element of the array and coming down. So now in order to find the length of the array, so here we use again the same input 3. So we need to pass length, len, like a function, and then we pass the variable here, which is input 3, and let's print it. So if you see here, so this particular input is of length 30, so which means that it has 30 characters. So these are all some of the operations that we can do on a string variable. So now let's see some of the other functions like strip, split, concat, as well as replace. So the strip is used in order to remove any trailing spaces as well as spaces after the end of the last character in a particular variable. So now let's just print this variable and then see what's happening. So as you see here, it's printing along with the spaces. So this is a common problem that happens in any data science project. So if you can see, there is a space right here and towards the end as well. So when you use a data source, like especially when you are dealing with a semi-structured data, so what happens is the data would not be clean in most of the cases. There would be some trailing spaces and spaces towards the end. So we can't use those data as such in our data science project. So we need to do some kind of a cleaning. So strip is a function that is used in order to clean any trailing as well as any spaces towards the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use strip and pass on the new values to the new variable txt1 and then see how the values are. So if you see here now, all the spaces are removed now. So like any trailing space as well as space towards the end are removed, and now it's clean. So that's the use of the strip function. And next one is splitting. So again, splitting is also a very common function that is used. Let's say in some cases we have a date and time field, whereas we want to retrieve the year or month or a day from that particular string. So then we can use a splitting function. In some cases, the string could include multiple values, later separated by an hyphen, slash, or anything. So if we want to separate those values, then we use the split function. So here what I'm doing is I'm going to use the input 4. So here we have okay, so now I'm going to create a new variable for input 4. So as an decimal value, so let's say 0.25. So now what happens is, so now input 4 is a string with a decimal value. So I'm going to split based on the dot. So what happens is, by executing this one, the values before the dot as well as the values after the dot are separated, and they are stored in an array. So the first element will be the element before the dot, which is 12. Second element is the element after the dot. So we can pass maybe any number here. So let's say 125.25. So now what happens is it creates 125 as well as 25. So now let's say I want to I have maybe a date 2020 0901. So now I want to split based on this. So now what happens is it's already separated into 3 values. So we have the year, month and date. So this is also a very commonly used function that comes very handy when we are solving a particular use cases. So in many cases we would want to just extract the year or month or a day or a time, so for which this particular function will be very useful. And so after splitting, the next one is concatenation. So now let's say we have so instead of splitting, we have values in multiple places or multiple columns, and we want to join them together. So here, in for a simplicity, what I am doing is I am passing I'm creating 3 variables like I1, I2 and I3. So I1, I'm passing data, science, and I'm going to print the I3, which is nothing but I1 plus I2. So by printing this, what happens is I'm printing data and science together. So without this here, by just mentioning I1 plus I2, what happens is it will print them without any space. So in order to create a space, so what I am doing is I'm just passing an empty space. So now what's happened is what's happening is the plus here for the string is being treated as the concatenation function. So there is no separate function like concat. Like if you are familiar with SQL or with any other programming language, so we use a separate function like concat in order to join 2 strings. So here, if the data type is string, so then by simply using plus, what happens is it will join them together. So now let's say instead of a string, let's say I pass on an integer to it. Let's see what's happening. So if you see here, it's not able to perform the concatenation because the second one is an integer, it's not a string. So now if I convert this into a string by making the value by bringing the value within the double quotes, and by executing this, now what happens is it's able to join them together. So that's the concatenation function. So it works only for the variable that is of a string data type. It can't be used for integer. So if you want to concatenate an integer, so first it needs to be converted into a string, and then it can be concatenated. And the last topic for today is about replacing a particular text. So what we are going to do is we are creating a new variable here called as text1. So now what we are going to do is we are going to replace the value signal with the value information. So for replacing, we use a function called as .replace. So now let's see how it works. So by executing this, so what happens is in our text we have signal word here. So now by using the replace and then passing by saying that the signal should be replaced with information, we can see here that the signal is replaced with information. So now let's say we have multiple value, we have signal repeated multiple times. So now if you see that how many times ever the value signal is present in the input, like every single value here would be replaced by the new value, which is information. So that's about the replacing. So now let's see the other one. So by passing an additional parameter, so here what I'm doing is I'm passing the additional parameter as 2. So what happens then is the first 2 utterance of the value signal will be replaced by information, whereas the rest of the utterance would be untouched. So as you see here, the first value it utters here, so this is replaced with information. The second value as well is replaced with information, whereas the third and fourth utterance and so on is untouched. So we can use replace. So the parameters that can be taken, like some of the default parameters is it needs to have the text that needs to be replaced and the value to which it needs to be replaced, and it can also take the optional parameter like a number of utterances that needs to be replaced starting from the first position. So it can't be random. So that's how the replace function works. So today we have seen about creating a new variable. Also we also have covered the data type string, how to find the data type, how to change the data type, and then we have seen how the string is considered as an array in Python, and some of the string functions like a strip, split, concat, as well as replace. So that's it for today. So I have a small exercise for you to try it out at home. So these are all some of the questions that maybe you can try it out and see if you are comfortable with the string data type, and you are comfortable in using Jupyter Notebook and Python programming. So that's it for the day 2. So that's it for today. See you on day 3. Thank you guys.